Prediction business is not a good one. Most predictions fall on their face. I saw something by some statistician who looked at predictions of the last 30 years in political terms, and said they were mostly terrible and wrong, according to experts on political issues, and that the accuracy was similar to that of an alcoholic throwing darts at a dartboard in a cup. So as a metaphor, the metaphor is, I will be drinking heavily and throwing darts at a dartboard. No, not the metaphor. What I will try and do is give some, in broad strokes, what I think the major tensions are going to be. You all have lots of data points and observations and thoughts on this. I know there's no reading, but you can read about this unless you happen to have descended into a bunker over the past several months and been totally blocked out from any communications. You know what's going on. So you've got a lot of information, and I hope we have much more of a conversation and discussion than me telling you from on high what I think. But I will tell you from what I think, and then you can tear it apart and we can have a discussion as we go. But just by way of background, and again, presenting myself, I've been working in human rights in the States and internationally over the past, I'm old, 30-something years. I started working in human rights in the 1980s on the US-Mexico border with Central American refugees, and then got more interested in why are folks fleeing from Central America, and it was largely because the United States was propping up butcher regimes that were driving people to flee Central American states. And from there, I spent years, I worked in Chile, and Pinochet was still the dictator, so you know, through slide rules, do the calculation on that. And then I worked for Human Rights Watch in Brazil, that for a while, and ran another organization, a Brazilian organization that I founded with other colleagues in Brazil. It's now unfortunately an important organization in Brazil, working on a range of social justice and human rights issues. And then after I left Brazil, I came back to the States and started working at Harvard, where I met the brilliant professor Miller and the brilliant professor Davis. And while I was running the Human Rights Clinic and teaching Harvard Law School, and I ran the clinic at Stanford Law School, and I was also on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which you may or may not know what that is. Happy to talk about that if you want. Okay. I left Stanford Law School, moved back east, and this I'll put in a plug for my organization, and set up an organization called the University Network for Human Rights, humanrightsnetwork.org, if you want to Google it. And what we do is create spaces in universities for students to develop skills to work for social justice in a human rights framework. We do that with students from many disciplines, including law. And we also have, we are very keen on receiving in past recent law graduates that want to train to supervise undergraduates and others and to do human rights work. So if you have, I don't know what fellowships are available at Northeastern, hopefully there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I don't know. But if there are, we very gladly entertain applications from those of you who are about to graduate after you take the NPRE, something like this. We told them, like, no one's going to be listening to James Cavallaro studying for the NPRE. So I'm going to have to move around a lot to try to get your attention and keep you engaged so you don't think about not commingling client funds. It's all very nice. The things you can get away with as a lawyer. It's like, you know, knock off a bank. You might say that's not the worst thing. But, you know, just all sorts of crimes, but don't commingle client funds or you'll be disbarred. Okay? It's like choice C, question 13. Don't say you didn't get anything from this class. And Cavallaro, I haven't heard anybody say about anything. We told me not to commingle client funds. Good. What?
Success already.
Success already. All right, so we're ahead of the curve. Now we're in the bonus time. Okay, so some things I think to think about as we try and frame and consider the issues and the challenges that are going to be to face us if we care about social justice and human rights in this country and beyond. Okay? So that's what I'm going to try and talk about. So I started with I tried to go with bleak mode in most of the slides to set up the presentation. But I think things might not be as bleak as some people think they are. And of course, they also may be worse. But a lot of that depends on us, right? So that's what I'm going to try and focus on. Okay, so, is there like a button I can do?
I don't think we have.
All right, then I'll just,
you have me. So.
I'll do
exactly.
this. This means next slide. Okay, so something to think about here. You know, it's always good to start with a quote from Hannah Arendt, and that's what I do here. But you know, we really got to hold on to our humanity and our empathy, and our basic, you know, what keeps us together as human beings, right? There's a quote that I'm going to mangle from James Baldwin about, you know, what brings us together as human beings is generally much more powerful than what separates us. That's the paraphrase. He said it much more eloquently. Not a surprise. But this is something that, you know, we are facing the possibility of sliding into ugly authoritarians, right? Okay, so the stakes are pretty high. All right. What to expect generally, in broad strokes, and then we'll look at issues. One of the really big challenges, maybe the biggest one, this is the total train wreck, is that if the military are deployed inside the United States, this is, you know, for mass deportations. Any, you know, violation of the posse comitatus, of the sort of the doctrine, the idea that the military have no role within the United States, that's a slippery slope that I'm really, really worried about, and we should be worried about. What things, so I put that with a question mark, because I'm less certain of that. The other things I'm more certain of, I don't put. Decreased regulation? Absolutely, there will be decreased regulation. They've got Elon Musk in a new role where they've given him, you know, like a sledgehammer and said, go find the administrative agencies, Elon, okay, to destroy them. And then they're putting people in administrative industries who believe that those agencies shouldn't exist. Okay? So there's going to be a whole lot less regulation. And we know what less regulation means in the field of human rights. Regulation, as much as it's a pain in the ass, oh, I feel like these rules, you know, we might not like it. Regulation's good. Regulation's good. Okay, it's a basic principle if you're a progressive. Cronyism. You know, the establishment is beside itself. That what's his name? Like Hegseth. Somebody look up unqualified Fox talking head Department of Defense, and you'll get it. I think it's Hegseth. Okay, so the folks inside the Beltway, the Pentagon regulars, are like, they're totally beside themselves that they didn't get one of their insiders to be in charge. Now, I'm not in favor of this individual, but I've got some issues with standard Pentagon policy. So some of the critiques you'll hear from me are not going to be the critiques you'll hear from someone who's like a mainstream Democrat will say, oh, this is, you know, he's undermining the standard America must run the entire planet paradigm. Okay, here's a wild card. That's what you're going to get with cronyism. You're going to get Downey's friends. And they're going to be doing things like Downey's friends have no business doing. And how is that going to shake out? Yeah, we have to figure that out. Okay, another thing we want to think about is the transactional nature of foreign policy. And this is one of the tensions that's really important. Since the Second World War, and slightly before, and a lot of people write about this, we can talk about it on Q&A, but I'm just going to get to this point. Since the Second World War, the United States has viewed its role in the world as hegemonic, as controlling the planet, but even more so after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then there's one global power, and it's responsible for the entire planet. Through NATO, through other organizations, through 800 military bases, through governments that the United States has installed or helped to install, or facilitated by supporting particular political parties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a consensus in Washington, that has been a consensus in Washington, and still is a consensus in Washington, with the exception of Donald J. Trump and some of his folks who are out on the fringe of the Republican Party, but now they run it. And the consensus has been about U.S. national interests being above any particular partisan dispute. And there's a machine in Washington. I work with people at the State Department. I've had to. But there's a consensus about what the United States should be doing in the world that really doesn't change very much across administrations. Donald J. Trump is not a man of principle. It's not as though he's coming in and saying, I want to reduce the U.S. hegemonic role in the world. No, it's like, I want to run the world to benefit my friends. Okay? And it's transactional. And it doesn't matter, it really doesn't matter what the person's, who's a head of state in another country, what their politics are, how close they are to the US hegemonic paradigm. It matters whether or not, for Donald Trump, it matters whether they're good for his business, his businesses, his friends' businesses, Jared's businesses, okay? Which is why you look at Saudi Arabia and you think, yeah, besties, because they bailed out Jared and they're going to get some special treatment, okay? But it's a very different approach to analyzing US foreign policy, the transactional nature of what benefits Donald J. Trump and his cronies, than to look at what benefits the strategic interests of the United States, multinational corporations based in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. It's a different analysis. And you're going to get, and it's kind of wild card. It's not good. It's not like I'm in favor of this, but it's destabilizing. Okay. So this is the point about the challenge of post-war US hegemony. What to expect? Continued annihilation of Gaza? Likely. Full annexation of the West Bank? Well, we just saw Mike Huckabee, who has said that there is no Palestine, there is no West Bank. There's only Judea and Samaria. That's the person who's going to be U.S. ambassador to Israel. So we don't know what to expect. Whatever sweet musings about peace that Donald J. Trump spat out during the campaign, not to be taken terribly seriously when you see what rubber hits the road, who's actually in charge of what agency, what embassy, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, if we can jump ahead domestically, these are some areas that we should be thinking about. And I'll run through these quickly, and then we'll look internationally. Mass deportation, border closure. Environmentally, gutting of the EPA, and also some state departments of environmental quality, which can be quite useful. I mean, I know some of your environmental activists, often you go to the state and you can get better responses. But he'll try and gut those too with his cronies in Republican states. Police violence, Section 1983, claims Department of Justice. You look at the oversight. He's going to do everything possible to gut that oversight. The housing crisis. The guy's a housing mogul. Housing. I don't need to tell you. You're on the couch. You spend $1,700 a month to live in a closet, right? Or to split a closet. I mean, you don't get your own closet for $1,700. I mean, come on, people. This is Boston, right? Okay, so I need to tell you about the housing crisis. You don't want to know what I paid when I graduated from law school to live in a sweet one-bedroom apartment in Washington, D.C. So on and so forth. So you got this, but that's going to get worse, probably. Further restrictions on reproductive rights. We'll talk about that if you want to talk about that. The institutionalization of Christianity in schools. This is coming down the pike, almost for sure. Attacks on civil society. Yesterday, I still think that Biden's the president, sort of, maybe. And there's other folks in Congress, and the Democrats control the Senate, but they're starting already. They're not waiting. And the Democrats are not responding as they should, which is like, we got 2 months, what can we do, right? But that's another story. Okay. And militia thuggery. This is the kind of thing, like you look at sort of the Minutemen and groups on the border, these folks have been empowered, and I said something, I gave you, here's what I've worked, here's where I worked, here's what I've done. I've worked in authoritarian states. I've worked in states where human rights defense was illegal, where I've been arrested for defending human rights, I worked in states where things go down the rat hole. And when they go down the rat hole, this is one of the first ways they go down the rat hole, is the legitimation of private armed groups. We got a lot of guns, we got a lot of private armed groups. There's been a lot of, really ugly stuff that's been going on under the radar screen that comes above the radar screen. That's almost as dangerous as this first mass deportation, the militarization, the bringing the military into the United States. Okay. And then just a series of things at the international level that we want to think about. International environmental oversight. Don't expect the United States to participate, expect them to gut international agreements. The degradation of NATO, but this, again, we'll talk about this at the end. Come back, put a pin in the degradation of NATO. The standard bipartisan consensus. The degradation of NATO is causing immense hand-wringing
among those who defend the standard consensus of US global hegemony. We don't really know what it means, and we'll see what it means if the United States defunds significantly NATO, and if Europe takes responsibility for its own security. In the short run, it means continued war with Ukraine and Russia. But in the medium and long run, it might mean a better foreign policy from NATO. It could. So, some of the things you have to suss out, we don't know which way they cut. Russia, Ukraine, again, transactional. Donnie maybe likes Putin better than he likes Zelensky. And so he doesn't want to continue to fund and provide billions of dollars for Ukraine in this war against Russia, right? Because it's not based on Russia poses a threat to US hegemony and the Western neoliberalization of the former Soviet Union states, right? Like, that's the way they think inside the Pentagon. That's always been the way they've done business. Donnie's got another set of calculus. I like this guy better. He'll help me open up the Moscow Trump Tower, right? We're gonna have to add those calculations to figure out what we're gonna have to oppose. Loss of US soft power, this is happening. This is happening already in real time. And so it's happened significantly since October 7th, excuse me, with US absolute unconditional support for Israel in the slaughter in Gaza, in Lebanon, in exploding pagers, etc. Right? The US has lost a lot. I spend a lot of time in the global south. And when I do, I generally show them my Italian passport. Because I can, or my permanent resident status in Brazil, because it makes me a little less hated than as a U.S. national. Okay, this is a big thing if you follow politics in other parts of the world. These individuals, to not say MFers, they've got the wind in their sails, the wind behind their back. And I say this, I follow the ones in Latin America in particular, Bolsonaro and Milei. They think that they have been lifted, and they have. One sort of fun fact you probably know, you're all internationalists, I presume, or maybe I don't know. If you look pretty much anywhere in the world, this is the big one that matters. And you turn on the television, or even if you look online, wherever you get your news from, you'll get news from your country, whatever that country is, and maybe if it's part of the francophonie, maybe you'll get news about Paris, and what's happening in France. But you'll always get news about the United States. So everybody, everywhere, they know that Halloween's on October 31st in the United States, or whatever other frivolous or political information is, and things are happening in the United States, they'll know about that. So this is being leveraged, this being the return of Donald J. Trump by the Bolsonaros and the Malays and other ethno-nationalists around the world. Okay. Military intervention in Mexico, this is a possibility. This is not, drone strikes in Mexico, right? And really ugly, nasty issues. Here's something you probably didn't follow. I followed it. But at the end of 2017, this guy, who's now in prison, lost the elections, stopped the counting, recounted. It was at the end of 2017, and the Trump administration they recognized the legitimacy of that election. We can talk about that if you want. But again, because they've got people who curry favor with the United States. For instance, this is one of the few governments that in this period of time was voting with the United States in the United Nations. You'll see votes in the United Nations. There was a vote in the United Nations today. It was everyone to 2. And there were a couple of abstentions, okay? Everyone on planet Earth, 193 countries, all of them against 2. You probably guessed the 2. United States and Israel. In some other votes, it'll be everyone against 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And the United States works hard to pick off a couple of states that vote with them. Honduras was one of the states that would get to vote for them. And it's transactional. So the economy vote for us on this thing that it's not about. Honduras doesn't care about what's happening on this issue or that issue. Vote with us so the vote doesn't look so bad. And one hand washes the other. And the one hand washing the other is when you lose the elections, we'll nod and wink and pretend you won the elections, and you stay in power until you leave power when your period is over and then get prosecuted for drug trafficking. United States is tough to play with. They got all the cards. Okay, this is the same sort of issue, but sort of at a global level. All right, let's move ahead, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll get to questions. So if we want to think critically and analytically, about what's going to happen moving forward, this is a little bit of a very simplistic power map. You know, you've got the Trump administration and you've got Donald J. Trump. Okay, it's a big country. It's involved in a lot of things. Almost everything is delegated. Who is it delegated to? Who has initial responsibility within the administration? So that's all these folks. And some of these folks, they don't look so good so far, but we're seeing who they are. But then you have, you know, you still have a Congress. I don't know what has to happen. I think the Democrats have to win 11 of the remaining 8 races that are being tabulated. But it's a very good chance, I understand, from the DNC fundraising mailers that I get. If I just give them another $50, they'll pull it off. Okay? So we may have a complete trifecta, friends, right? You know, these folks, and ironically, one prediction I'll make, I've told you, I'm the drunk with the darts. So I've already discounted my predictions, told you to take them with a huge grain of salt. I think this may provide more resistance to the most extreme measures that Trump will try and impose. Why? Because I think these folks, they want a nice, well-ordered, oligarchic, right? They want you to SDFU, accept that things are okay, go back to brunch, let corporations continue to extract, gut the regulatory state, allow foreign policy to be decided by the president and with no reference, political question, that whole supremacy clause, Article 2, Section, clause, Article 6, whatever, 2, whatever that is, right? The law of nations is the supreme law of the land. We don't really do that, not in the field of human rights. They want us to go back to business as usual. So I think this will be, and again, business as usual, and we'll talk about that, I think kind of sucks, all right? Me, from my left critical perspective, in case you didn't, I mean, look who invited me. So from my perspective, business as usual, not so good. But that's kind of what the Supreme Court wants. And Donald J. Trump and company, and a lot of these folks, they don't want business as usual. They want the full-on Christian white nationalist state, okay? And these folks, I don't think, want to be associated with that. So you may see more pushback from these, not on the gutting of the EPA. No, they're not going to push back on that. But attempts to deploy tens of thousands of active military service members to arrest undocumented migrants, I don't know. I think you might pick off 2 of the 6 majority votes. But we'll see. Again, remember me in the pub on my 11th Guinness with the dart, you know? I wouldn't bet on me, but at least that's what I think might be going on. Here, we want to look at us. We'll get to us in a second. Here, maybe some of you in this room are members. To vote in primaries, I had to register Democrat. It was a real kind of soul-searching exercise for me. It happened. In the media, right? Because the media, they have a team. Mostly, they're on Team Blue. Mostly. Not entirely. There's lots of Team Red, lots of Team Extreme. But, you know, we can talk about this. Okay, let's jump to the last couple of slides. Thank you. The good old days. We're living in the good old days, okay? And just a couple of things for us to look at, and then this will help us think about the last thing I want to talk about in the last couple of minutes is what should we do? How should we be thinking about these issues? So where were we? So let's just go through a couple of things as examples. If you pop to the next slide. You know, the reporter-in-chief, our hero, Barack Obama, right? So, you know, Team Blue, not really a guarantee that you're going to have righteousness in any particular area. All right, just, you know, and by the way, if you go back one more, sorry. Not forward one. This bar is going to be up here because it's an election year. So the Democrats supported draconian immigration legislation, which didn't pass because Trump thought we don't want to pass it. That'll help the Democrats. But I'm guessing you saw Kamala in that 1.5 minute. My daughter sent it to me, but I didn't see it anyway. she saw it first. Anyhow, the 1.5 minute clip where they're asking her, Kamala, about the wall, right? And it was like, well, he didn't build the wall. Ha 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 ha. So they're over here, okay? This year wasn't such a good year if you care about the rights of migrants. All right, and next. Don't get me started here. But the outcry over the separation of families, which is real, which is one of the most vile things that Trump and company and Stephen Miller did, which is fundamentally about cruelty. It's about cruelty. That's the goal. Nothing more than that. Cruelty, because cruelty appeals to the ugly, worst instincts of their base. Okay? And the Democrats uniformly, AOC, went, visited, denounced this, okay? And then for the past 4 years, crickets, because it's Team Blue that's separating families, okay? And that's okay, or not, right? That's a question for us. Okay, over here. So you may remember this, you may not. This was an absolutely insane, by the way, it was terrible, violation of international law and all that, so just clear right, but it was understood to be absolutely destabilizing work of a madman, Trump, okay? When this happened in early 2020, okay? This targeted assassination. It was a lot of those things, I agree. But compare that, jump to the next slide if you would, please. Compared to the level of destabilization, you may recognize this. This is somebody in a fruit store and a pager's blowing up, okay? Blowing up hundreds and hundreds of pagers. These are all the states that Israel is currently involved in some sort of military engagement with. The level of destabilization of planet Earth now, compared to if you go back one, to this, which was spun in early 2020, I've already forgotten about it. I was like, Trump is a madman. He's destabilizing the Middle East. He's destabilizing the world, right? This is a walk in the park compared to this. And the Soleimani killing was terrible. But where we are now is infinitely worse. So just to push forward, the other issue is the role of the United Nations. You're all international law. You're international law folks. So you probably know that Security Council resolutions are the strongest manifestation of international law. Notwithstanding that, when the United States finally allowed a ceasefire resolution to pass in the Security Council, the spokesperson of the Department of State, the UN representative for the United States, the U.S. representative to the United States, and the Department of Defense all gave statements that they clearly worked out in advance, saying this is not it's a non-binding Security Council resolution. This is a non-binding court judgment. Oh, okay, good. It's good to know. It's one of those non-binding ones, not one of the binding ones. Okay, so the degradation of the United Nations, and I happened to be at an event at a dinner with the Irish ambassador and to the United Nations, and he was talking about from the inside. And Ireland is on the Security Council, so he's in the room. And so this is off the record issue. I won't quote him because he was veiled, but his perception, which is the dominant perception, is that across the board there's a recognition that the United Nations is losing legitimacy at a breakneck pace. Which now, there may be an upside to this, which is there are increasing efforts to restructure the United Nations, to move away from the 1945 construction, which allows the United Kingdom and France. I mean, come on. So, if you look at planet Earth today, and you're picking out 5 superpowers who are going to get the veto, Russia, China, the United States, they all have plausible cases, right, based on population size and military power. France and the United Kingdom, I'm sorry, friends, it's this 21st century. Thank you for participating, right? You've got arguments for you. Okay, so there's an increased effort in the Security Council, in the United Nations, to reconceptualize the United Nations, to strengthen the United Nations, because people in the United Nations feel that the institution has lost its credibility. So there's a real crisis. Okay, and finally, last couple of things. Reasons to be hopeful with flowers that could bloom. If we give them water and love. And that's up to you. my generation, sorry, Martha, I'm gonna have to drag you down with this. Like, we torched the planet, right? We extracted the planet. We're your landlords, right? We've extracted wealth across generations. Right? Everything, our goal, not me personally, I'm not outside, but okay. But our collective goal has been to eliminate, or reduce significantly, not eliminate the possibility that you will own anything. It's the Netflixization of everything. You know, you can't turn on your television and get stuff for free. It's $12.99 a month. It's $36.99 a month. Whatever it is, you can't even get the internet connection for free, right? You'll never really own a house unless you take that job with, you know, Sullivan and Cromwell. Maybe some of you have, and if you have, you know, best wishes to you. But your life is going to be significantly worse than in terms of well-being, your cost of living, et cetera, than previous generations, right? So it's our generation, we talk about all those things, but our generation has created significant challenges for you. It's a nice thing to say about my generation's impact on the planet. We've created challenges for you. But these are things that we can think about that I think will give us some hope. One, after January 20th, when Trump starts and his administration start engaging in aberrant behavior, which they will, when Stephen Miller starts, you know, proposing executive decrees, which he will, you will see that in addition to your friends who've been in the encampment and have been protesting and are wearing keffiyehs to class, nice keffiyeh, in addition to that handful of people, you'll see, oh, Joe, how are you? Haven't seen you for 4 years. You know, and Mary and whoever the hell else are part of the, you know, the Team Blue resistance. They're going to resist again, okay? Now, whatever I might think of them, however jaded I may sound, if I sound jaded, it's only because I'm jaded. Okay, no. However jaded I may sound, they are useful and will be helpful in the various battles we have to fight, okay? So the fact that they were on the sidelines for the past 4 years, on family separation, on slaughter in Gaza, on even, can we at least let UNRWA help people after they've been bombed, right? I don't know. Biden says there's some concern that maybe 2 people who might have once read a pamphlet from Hamas, so we should shut the whole thing down, you know? Okay, wherever they've been, you'll see them change their tune. You'll see them come back. And that's not the worst thing. Let's take them and at least insofar as they're working on issues that we care about, okay? We got to work locally, figure out, you know, what we can do, what we can lock in, what we can, you know, most of your lives, you live locally, so build that up, invest in that. This, I think, is a wild card. I think a restructuring of NATO could be a good thing. Not that I think Europe is a font of righteous justice. I just think that when we are, okay? Particularly in the Trump administration and generally, right? In Europe, they have socialist parties. They sometimes win. And when they win, they'll oppose military aid to genocide, right? In Spain, Ireland, Belgium, right? So maybe a NATO controlled by the collection of states in Europe might be a little bit better. Okay, and then the last slide, more reasons to be hopeful. And this is just sort of the unintended consequences. It may be, and I think we have to hope, it may be that the period we're ending is not the beginning of the demise of our thin democracy. It may not be that's what it is. That's what it looks like here. If we step back 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years in time, we may see, no, actually this was the beginning of the train wreck. They got the keys to the car. They got the car, they drove it into a goddamn tree or a wall, because that's what they do, that's what their plan is. If you look back, as an example, this is a comparison, if you think the election in 2008, the first African-American president, and then re-election in 2012, it's a transformation, it's a realignment, right? That's what people were telling me, right? I was around then, right? Zane, remember, it was like, this is it, this is everything, yes, we can, we've won, okay? And what was it? In my opinion, hey, so you can critique it, whatever you may think of Obama. Obama, in effect, by not holding anyone to account for the Wall Street demise, by not changing, in effect, U.S. military anti-terrorism policy, except around the edges, and in investing in Wall Street and in Silicon Valley, set the table for Trump. There's a lot of critiques that say that. I'm one of the people who tends to believe that's a fair assessment, brutal, of the Obama presidency. It was 8 years that prepared the path for the ethno-fascists or the ethno-nationalists to take over, right? And that may be what's happening now. We don't know. We don't know. This may be a crash and burn presidency where, and there may be a process, the last thing I'll say was just about the Democratic Party, there may be a process of either rehabilitation of the Democratic Party, as a rehabilitation, I mean back to the FDR roots without the racism. Take the good, throw the bad. There could be a revival of the left union progressive base of the Democratic Party. Or the Democratic Party could collapse and implode. And there could be some other third-party alternative. I don't know, we're guessing, okay? But I think we're at a point where people who have looked at the last election, not the folks in the DNC, not the folks who will fail up, but other folks outside, and they basically said, look, this country's at a point where either it's going to respond to the young, progressive base, provide job guarantees, universal basic income, university education that doesn't set you back $300,000. What you're paying to get your degree, or someone's hemorrhaging for you to get a law degree here? Sorry if I said something I shouldn't have. It's very expensive. Anyhow. But basic demands, Medicare for all, decent minimum wage, right? Like the social compact and an end to U.S. Military hegemony, 800 military bases, $1 trillion a year military budget without the extras, right? If you do the math, that's $3,000 for each of you every year. Every person, forget about if you have a job. If you have a job and you're working, you're paying $10,000 or $12,000 every year to have a U.S. I mean, folks in Europe, they're laughing all the way to the bank. They're like, thank you, you got free medical care. Keep funding, keep funding the global control by the West. So I think there's a possibility that we stumble into a hole a little bit further, but then we come back with some meaningful change. Or at least we have to hope that's what we're going to do and fight for that. Because if we don't fight, we can be certain that the flowers will not bloom. On that note, I'm going to wrap up and answer your questions, thoughts, comments, and have an open discussion if we can.
Yeah.
I know you have to step out in a bit, right?
Yes, I'll just briefly step out and then come back in. But that doesn't change anything about this process.
Hello, people online.
Happy to take questions also from online, just so you know. Just put your hand up or put something in the chat.
Sure. Should I respond to questions, or you want to you have a queue? I don't know if you have a
No,
procedure.
you just call it.
I'm sorry. Your name is
Hi, I'm Bryn.
and you're a 3L or?
I am a 3L.
Okay.
I was just wondering, well, first, thank you so much for being here, but also as someone hoping to practice in the field of humanitarian immigration in about 8 or 9 months, what do you think are our most powerful tools to defend non-citizen clients against this administration are?
Oh, okay. Good question. So, one, I think the discursively is probably more important than legally. I think discursively, the Democrats have been largely useless on this. But discursively, I think collectively we need to retake the idea that we're all immigrants, unless you're a Native American, in which case, yeah, let's talk about your rights that are being systematically violated. But we're all immigrants. And I think it's something that should be done in every debate. Like when someone says, oh, we're legal immigration, just you push back to them and say, when did your grandparents, they came legally, okay, where did they come from? Slovakia. Okay, so in other words, they went to the law library in Slovakia, because there's no internet, and they researched the legal status for arrivals at Ellis Island. Is that what they did? Or did they leave because they wanted to find, which one? Because these people, I think we have to retake the moral narrative. We have to do better at tapping into ethics and decency as narratives. Democrats don't do this. The Democrats are like, yes, we support we support a very secure border and we're opposed to illegal migration. He gave away the goddamn store. That's what they do in the first sentence. They give away the store and they're like, yes, but what we want 7 people to be admitted and we'll shoot the other 93. And they want to shoot all of them. You know, it's like, no, thank you, right? So I think one is this first one, really, really important. And then the legal work that you're doing, yeah. I mean, the legal work is a fight at the level of individual casework. But I think it's a bigger fight, and the odds are stacked against you to legalize folks here. But I think the first thing that's going to happen is just going to involve people putting their bodies on the line. Is going to involve, like, when and if they start sending police or the National Guard or the military to round people up, people who have born in the United States citizenship or nationalized, like, we got to be the front line and say, take me first. That's what we're going to have to do, right? Take me first because this is wrong. This is not what we do, right? That first and foremost, is I think how we stop this. If you mobilize enough people, they can't arrest 2 million people at once in New England. And yeah, there's just a couple of ideas, but then there's there's all the legal issues, and then there's questions about, oh, should we try to litigate should we litigate a case in this circuit and then deny cert to the Supreme Court? I mean, if you talk about legal strategy, but I mean, I'm sure you're doing that with who are you working for?
I don't have a job yet.
Oh, sorry. Boy, it's very expensive to go to school. I'll leave now if you want. You don't even have to pay
You know,
for it.
my class alone is worth the cost.
You don't get a great job.
I'm doing like impact litigation, small scale at GBLS in the spring.
Okay, cool. All right. Lovely. Sure.
I'm Lenny, I'm a 2L.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest barriers, right, is the sense of American, like, exceptionalism. We don't like to compare ourselves, you know, like, these basic ideas of rights, leave that stuff at the door, that's like communist stuff. This is
Right.
America, buddy. How can we maybe, like, normalize legally, interdisciplinary, locally comparing ourselves, like, being willing to look at other countries and compare ourselves to improve for the better?
Where are the easy questions going to come from? So, Lenny, you said, right? Yeah, it's an excellent question. Hold on just a minute. I teach some of this stuff about how, really, in the formative years of the United Nations Charter and in the decade afterwards, how the United States acted first to hamstring the Charter, so we have limited or no impact of the domestic jurisdiction clause, brought to you by John Foster Dulles. So if you undermine human rights, someday you may have an airport named for you too, something to look forward to. But there's a lot of the rejection of any UN Charter, and then afterwards, Caroline Anderson writes like this, but afterwards in the first decade, the turn away from human rights and the turn to civil rights, the turn to the Constitution during the McCarthy period, and we still haven't overcome that legacy when you compare us to pretty much any other wealthy, Western, whatever state you want to compare us to, right? Like that rejection, we're still fighting that. And then obviously you have an expert here on bringing human rights home, right? Literally the author of the compilation on how to do that. And you should really ask her, but I'll give you my 2 cents. And if you want to jump in and say, here's 16 things we can do. I think in the current context, one thing that we can do, and this is something the conference that we were at Irvine that people are talking about, are local initiatives in different areas to accept as binding international treaties. Like that's something that you can do without the Senate and the presidency. And if you have enough of that groundswell, that yes, we are going to follow international human rights standards in the city of Boston, in the city of Cambridge, in Somerville, right? And maybe in the state of Massachusetts. That's sort of a bottom-up approach to making human rights relevant. But a lot of it is discursive. A lot of it involves, and I'll tell you, one of the things I do, I wear myself out doing this, but I teach a class at Yale, and I taught it at Colorado, and I taught it at Harvard, and UC Irvine, UCLA visiting, on the Inter-American Human Rights System, which I'm sure folks here don't know what the Inter-American Human Rights System is. maybe you who've got the Syntheia sticker on your computer, maybe you know what the Inter-American Human Rights System is. I don't know, maybe more of you do. Can never tell. Let me see, Dana. Is that right? Is that one? You read
Which one?
the red one? Or is that not? Let me see. It looks like oh no, it's not. This
I
one.
doubt it.
Oh, it's Texas. All right. I thought it was a Syntheia sticker. No, I'll get you a Syntheia sticker. It's really
We
simple.
love human rights in Texas.
No, yeah, Texas is the font of human rights defense. But the human rights, one of the things you can do and should be doing in law school is, and I don't know who's involved in this fight, but you should all be required to study international law, international human rights law. You shouldn't be able to walk out of this institution without studying international human rights law. And that's something that you can demand, right? You can say, why don't we have this class? We want to be citizens of the world. We want to be lawyers at the global level, not just in, on Columbus Avenue, right? Like it's a big national school, right? It's not Ernie's Law and Grill. It's an excellent school, right? That demand or that education that was actually a paper that I was going to present, and then the election. But demanding that. If lawyers, and I think lawyers are not important, but they're somewhat important. If lawyers all knew what international human rights standards were, they'd be more likely to use them in court. It would be part of our discourse. It might be part of our campaigns, et cetera, right? You compare the United States to pretty much any other country, and the level of ignorance of international human rights standards, international human rights oversight bodies, I mean, it's glaring. Like a high school student would beat a U.S. student in a debate on international human rights. And that's one of the things that we can change. Anyhow, question. So,
not a question, just something.
I'm sorry, you are? Sorry,
oh, sure, yeah. Jules 3L. Just a comment, something to put on your radar in terms of sort of like the power map that you were talking about.
Right.
Because you mentioned that media sort of tends to lean on this like institutionalist, like we want to keep the status quo, don't want the country to spiral into a viral mess, right?
Right. And the Supreme Court also, I think I may have said that right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I agree when we're talking about legacy media, so television and like print news outlets.
Oh yeah.
They tend to be very institutionalist. Yeah, they want to maintain the status quo because it makes them money and it gives them power. However, I think a really important part of this analysis is to look at online media, and online media is not the same landscape. Online media is overwhelmingly right-wing, and like if you're looking at viewership for some of the most like popular right-wing channels, the viewership is higher than
the cable channels.
Than cable channels at this point. So a really big part of like our work in the next couple of years is going to be examining that right-wing pipeline and trying to get people off of it, because if we're to be frank, it's taking sad, lonely incel boys and turning them into Nazis. So like that's so I think that that's like a really big part of the analysis here, and I just wanted to name that.
I totally agree, and I probably should have put that in, but I was trying to speak for 15 minutes and I spoke for 25 anyhow, so I couldn't include it. But I think you're right, and I think that's also true globally. Brazil is a country near and dear to my heart, and I even misread the state of Texas into the formation of Brazil. Can have it anyway. Brazil is a country where that's, I think, as or more extreme, and not just sort of the channels, but just like the WhatsApp news groups, and with totally fanciful, non-fact-based narratives that yes are converting incels into neo-Nazis or something along the spectrum from moderate right to full-fledged ethno-nationalist Nazis. And I will admit, I don't think there are any easy solutions. I tend to think that the way to sort of combat effectively, and you don't get everyone this way, unless you get enough people maybe to make a difference in elections, but the way to combat the temptation of what is really a caste-based logic. If you read Isabel Wilkerson on this, who's great. But the idea of race in America as caste, as rigid, as rigid in many ways as the caste structure in South Asia, is that you have, and again, let me just be super clear. It's not like I'm saying, oh, poor, rural white racist. I'm not saying that. Okay, so just please hear me out. Okay, but you have working class white men who are coming of age at a time when being a white male does not give you the same privilege it gave you 20, 30, or 40 years ago. That's a good thing because being a white male should not give you special privileges. I say that as a white male. Okay, that said, I've had privileges. I know that. I see that. I live that. Okay, that shouldn't be the case. But coming of age as a white male, working class, where when you feel like the government and the Democrats and the elites have abandoned you, right? You're so much more likely to fall into the rabbit hole of the media sources you're talking about that will legitimate your rage and will allow you to vent your rage. They're not giving you anything else. Right? Vent your rage here. You ain't getting anything. Okay? I think we respond to that, by actually providing a decent quality of life for people. $20, $25 an hour minimum wage, medical care, free community college, free university, universal basic income when you don't have a job, right? Like all those things that we could do. Some of them we did during the pandemic. Extended unemployment insurance. If you provide those things, you pick off enough incels to make them participants in society. Maybe they get out of mom and dad's basement. They interact with a person of color and they realize, not Satan, okay? And they become productive folks, right? Or they can continue to be racist, but they'll vote for the whatever progressive option that is. And personally, I'll take it, okay? I would like them to not be ugly racists, but I don't want them to be ugly racists who empower the really ugly racists to run the country, right? So sometimes we gotta, but anyhow, I totally agree with your point on media. I don't know what the answer is, but it's one of the biggest challenges, and I totally take an oversight in this brief presentation for sure. I don't know if you want to.
You should call.
Yeah, I think you had your hand before, and then with your lovely network. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Darlene.
Oh, so then 1, 2, 3. Darlene, you already started. Then you were.
Anna.
Darlene, Anna, and then you. Sorry.
Okay. Hi. This is gonna come off networky, but I promise I'm asking in the interest of how do I best help. But if you're from rural America and you don't have any legal or professional connections in your family, how do you break into the international field, and is it even necessary for the fight that we're trying?
Are you asking about someone for a friend who's maybe in that red chair right there, from rural America in the red chair? I'm curious, where are you from?
I'm from Central Valley, California.
Yeah, okay. So I'm familiar with it. I was at Stanford for a long time. So you drive an hour or two and the world changes.
Yes.
Drastically. Okay. So I'm not sure if it's necessary or not necessary. I actually think I didn't put this in here, but where I think there might be hope moving forward is in union organizing and tenant union organizing. That sort of grassroots kind of work from the bottom up. And there's certainly lots of organizing to be done in the Central Valley. So I'm not going to tell you, oh, you should do this international thing. But if you want to do the international thing, since I'm here and since you're a student of our friend Zena, here's my card. I'm happy. This is I have to have a conversation. Ping me afterwards, and I'll give you my 2 cents. Here's things you might be able to do, etc. Right? As opposed to sharing that with 48 people who have other concerns. But I'm happy to talk to you. What's your name again?
Darlene.
Darlene. From what town?
Loomis.
Loomis, California. Yeah. Further south or further north?
North.
North. Okay. All right. Loomis. On Route 5 or?
80.
Okay. 80. All right. Yes. Loomis. Yes. I'm sorry. Darlene, right? Anna now, right?
Yes. Hi. I'm a 3L here, and kind of going off of Jules' point, I have been kind of disturbed looking at the voting records of Gen Z in this last election,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if it connects to some of the points that you talked about with the increased Christianization of education, the proliferation of book bans, if this is just a continuation of like the fundamentally American anti-intellectualism, or if this is something entirely new, and if so, what should be done?
Pretty much every question has been like the statement, the abstract on a thesis.
Yeah, can you solve these issues, please?
That would be my disclaimer for my thin answer, which will not answer the response to the depth of the question. It's a very good question. I happen to think, if you look at the data on this, you'll see, compare the United States and say Europe. When they do surveys of, do you go to a church, a Christian church, or religious service at all on a weekly basis? And you see the percentage of people that say yes in the United States, and the percentage of people that say yes in Europe. In Europe, it's much, much, much lower, and that correlates to greater support for women's rights, reproductive rights. I mean, not going to church, for women's rights, reproductive rights, for a more robust state, for free university education. So I think, and again, I'm not here to criticize any particular faith. I was raised Catholic. I have not been to Mass since probably long before any of you were born, if you care. So I'm not practicing, but that was the faith tradition, of my family. And I say that because I'm not here to criticize any religion, okay? But I think there is a particular brand of evangelical Christianity, which, since I happen to have studied some of this stuff, I did study like a semester studying theology, but it has very little to do with Christianity, in my humble opinion. And it has everything to do with imposing my limited beliefs about what is correct and incorrect, appropriate and inappropriate behavior on you. You can't have that abortion because I've decided it. It has very little to do with what Christ preached, but which is an aside. But I think if you look, and I spent a lot of time, most of my adult life in Latin America, if you want to see the specter of where this takes us, apart from very famous television shows that you might watch or books you can read, right? About what's that one called? What's that? Handmaid's Tale. Thank you. I'm visualizing the outfits. But apart from that, if you look to Latin America and see what the evangelical Christian right has done across the hemisphere, wow. So that's, I think, the real concern. But your question was a little more sophisticated. It was that, and is it a return to the roots of the U.S.?
Like anti-intellectualism, like that's been a huge issue in the U.S. for years, and I feel like it's kind of come to a head in this election by saying that like Trump is different from the Washington elite or whatever, which is obviously like just coded language for like he's like me, white,
Yeah, he's like you, white, but it's like, absolutely the anti-intellectual, the know-nothing tradition in American politics, which is deep, deep, deep roots. Yes, I think the Democrats, who quite consciously made a play to creating a broad enough base through identity politics, but abandoned working class voters. That Bernie Sanders said recently, you've abandoned working class voters. Many other analysts have said that. I think that the Democrats have pigeonholed themselves, particularly on the kind of websites that Jules mentioned, right? They pigeonhole themselves as out of touch coastal elites who only seek the votes of other coastal elites and have abandoned, and African Americans in the swath of the country that basically Democrats don't campaign in, right? But they've abandoned working class votes and working class values, and that makes it, I think, much more likely that the 17-year-old incel, when he, because generally men you're talking about, right, first get to vote, they want to reject, the elitist, highfalutin, overeducated New York and Silicon Valley types, right? That's a thing. It's definitely a thing. And again, with the Democratic Party, if it's going to be the party, and personally, if we could just say goodbye to the Democratic Party and form some other party and actually get hundreds, a couple 100 million people to register, which is tough, I understand, to do from an organizational perspective. I would say, you know, ciao, hasta luego, au revoir to the Democratic Party. But if it's going to be relevant, then it's got to return to its working class roots and campaign in Oklahoma with working class white people, right? Like that's, you got to win those votes too, because it's a big country. You can't go out, we don't care. Because that stench of we think you're really, I'm not even sure you're a citizen or should be the way we are because your SAT is too low. Okay, whatever, right, your SAT is too low, right? Like that attitude, that stench of that attitude, the waft of it affects voters across the country, not just in Idaho and states that Democrats have, you know, given up on. Anyhow, yes, you've been patiently waiting.
I'm Brienne. I'm also a 3
Brienne or Brianna?
Brienne.
Brienne.
I am curious about how you see family separation changing through this Trump presidency. Like, I know that it hasn't changed at all, and like it's kind of gotten more expansive, or definitely has gotten more expansive. But like not only on the immigration front, but also on the family policing front.
Yeah. So what I see, unless there's pushback, Core Civic, I think, is one of the private prison companies whose stock has gone up something like 40%. You can look it up. That was since Election Day. It's a private company that incarcerates people as their business, right? And their stock is spiked. I use that as a data point to make the case that, yes, I expect, because Stephen Miller has been given like a deputy chief of staff position. Stephen Miller is, you know, wow, I'm being recorded, right? So I'm not going to say anything about Stephen Miller, but there is a scene in the movie called The Omen where they shave the little kid's head and they find the 3 sixes. That's just an aside. It is not really the at all. I'm talking with, you want to hear some movie vignettes, right? That was one of the like. Back to the topic. I think they fully intend to, if they can, if they are not stopped, to bring in the National Guard, local police forces, state police forces, and the military to round people up, people without documents, incarcerate them en masse, and incarcerate them separately. Incarcerate adults, male adults, female adults, and children. That's what I think they plan to do. That's really nefarious. We have to stop that. That's what I think. So I on the horizon, I think is an intensification of family separation. And at the border, that will be the protocol. The protocol will be adult men, children, adult women, right? With all of the grotesque scenes, the stomach-turning scenes of mothers or fathers being physically separated from their children. And that's what we have to fight against, right? And put our bodies on the line. That's what I think we have to do. Because yes, if they get no resistance, they will do that. And on this, we're going to need the not absolutely righteous Team Blue Democrats, because we need numbers. Anyhow, sorry to go back to the bleakness. Yes, and then your question here.
What was it like to advocate for human rights in states that deemed that kind of advocacy illegal, and what do you feel like is the sort of added value of using a human rights advocacy?
So I worked in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship, and then through the transition, and it was all sorts of things. Being in a state where I worked in an office that had a bogus front, and I couldn't tell people what I did. I was an auditing student at the University of Chile Law School because that was my front, and so there were all sorts of like limitations, etc. But one of the things that I remember, among the most powerful and moving experiences in my life, is that there would be demonstrations which were totally illegal, and they'd be organized for the internet by word of mouth and by phone with like sort of coded messages, and they would be like, all right, we're going to be on this corner on the Paseo Mala, or at the Plaza de Armas, wherever it is, And at exactly 1 o'clock, we're going to start the demonstration. They're called lightning demonstrations. Manifestación relámpago. Okay? And so we get there a few minutes before. You have a banner or something under your overcoat or in a backpack. And at 1 o'clock, you'd go out in the street and with your banners. And this was a group called, it was an anti-torture group. And we'd have chants and songs that we'd sing. And we'd walk along the main street. And we know at some point the police are going to show up with batons and water cannons. And you'd probably get sprayed down your hose with this really nasty water they put, skunk water they call it, to like make your skin itch. And you might get whacked in the head. You might get arrested, all of that, right? But until you were doing that, you'd go out in the street and you'd sing. And people would come off the side of the street, people on the side of the street applauding. People on the side of the street, like they're just at work that day. And this thing happens, and they go out and join you when they may be arrested, and they know that they may get their asses kicked, and they know that, right? So there's this sense, as effed up as all this, as effed up as that guy is. No, sorry. Sorry, the PowerPoint. As effed up as all this is, and all the dangers, right? There's a fundamental decency in most people, and we have to tap into that. And if we tap into that well, we can fight back, right? So it can be really inspiring to challenge nefarious forces. It's dangerous, it's risky, it's harder, but there's a sense that you're doing what you were born to do, right? Like you're doing dignified, righteous work. So there's that. And the second question is the international element,
Sort of,
the human rights element.
yeah, so like, what do you think the value add is in using human rights framework and discourse in your advocacy as opposed to?
So in pretty much every other part of the world, it gives your advocacy a legitimacy. I'll talk about the United States in a second. We've spoken about the United States where there's a history of rejecting things international. There's a very arrogant, we're America, and we reject that communism and international. Right? There's a long, ugly tradition that goes back to McCarthy before we talk about. In other parts of the world, it gives your advocacy a legitimacy. Because generally, even those authoritarian leaders purport to be advancing some version of justice or rights or decency, right? I mean, the junta in Argentina, who were just vicious butchers, they purported to be advancing Western Christian values, and they had at least formal discursive respect for the United Nations and things international, right? By the way, one of the things about this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, undermining the United Nations, one of the costs, I didn't get into this, is the delegitimation of the United Nations and with that, everything that goes with that, things international, human rights, right? Like real meaningful costs. I've been in a funk for the past year, not just over the daily images of babies and children maimed and their parents crying over their bodies. Like you're a kid, you can't watch one of those videos of losing it, right? Of like, the father stroking the hair of their kid who's 6 years old and just was killed, right? I mean, those things they're soul crushing, right? But part of this, in addition to that soul crushing, which is the most important thing I know, is the knock-on effects and the destruction of an international order based on anything other than raw power and violence, and we will crush this other country or state or people because we can, right? Like that's been a huge hit. When things international legitimated, then there's a real power in tapping into that. In the United States, we have to, and again, you have one of the people who's a pioneer in this right here, in row 2, we have to build the legitimacy of human rights because it's a set of values that tends to be more constant and better in terms of promoting human dignity and justice. We need to build the legitimacy of those norms so that we can tap into them in this country. So we need to do both things at the same time. Tap into those norms, but build legitimacy. In most other countries in the world, legitimacy is there. It's eroding, but it's there, and we need to tap into it. Because it's useful, because it helps us. It advances our agenda. Sure, you get, I think, the last question, because 2 o'clock, right, there's another class, and I don't know.
I think it goes up to 10.
Oh, we go to 2:10?
Want to, yeah.
No, I'm happy to, I thought it was 2. If it's 2:10, you have the last question if it's about 12 minutes.
I guess my name is Annabelle. I'm 2.
Hello, Annabelle.
I'm really interested in this question of the increased isolation of the U.S.
Right.
and like how these this global machinery of like human rights or the UN are going, and like the EU is also like an international. Like there's all these different coalitions and all these different groups that are doing these things, and they're going to continue moving forward with or without us.
Right.
But like that does leave obviously some groups and like countries in the West. For example, my family is from Taiwan, and there's this increasing alignment of Taiwan with the U.S. But then, like, I'm interested in hearing more about your thoughts about what this increased isolation of the U.S. and like this. The U.S. is like very provincial, right? It's like the anti-intellectual streak that Anna was talking about, like, really. It's just, I think it has reached this kind of flashpoint. And what does that mean for us here, but then also for people in other areas of the world?
It's a great question. So a few observations. First, I talked about the post-Second World War world in which the U.S. seeks actively to achieve hegemony, battles with the Soviet Union in many ways, directly and indirectly, for 4+ decades, and eventually achieves hegemony. Right, and that's sort of the default operating status of the State Department, say, is to maintain that hegemony. But the United States is losing force globally. And this, I didn't put this in the slides because, again, I'm not focusing on human rights, but I think it is essential. I'm glad you raised it. But if you look, what you'll see is that the United States is losing force. And the BRICS states and the states that are seeking to join BRICS are gaining force. BRICS held a meeting with Putin and others, and Guterres, the head, Guterres, I remember saying it's Guterres, Portuguese, was present and took a lot of critique from Western European states. Why are you going to a meeting with Putin? He's Satan. And, he had his responses, etc. But it's quite symbolic. And it's symbolic of the increased power of those countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and other states that are joining that coalition. I think the days of U.S. hegemony are numbered. I don't think that number is 12 days. I don't know how many units of 365 days it is, but I think this is the slide and the loss of relevance. And the questions, and this is, again, the drunkard with the dart, in predicting what does that mean going forward. What it means going forward is a world that is not unipolar, that is not run exclusively by the whims of the United States, where Europe has a much more significant role. They're being forced into that now militarily and otherwise because of the threat to NATO. And so they're going to be more responsible for their own defense, which might actually be, on the whole, a good thing. But there's also the growth of Brazil, India, China, South Africa as relevant political forces. Where do you see this? And I think the United States, in this administration, not Trump, the other guy, the one from Delaware, Biden, that's his name, okay? But where you see this really clearly is in the alignment of countries with regard to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And you see and I'll give you sort of 3 snapshots or 3 or 4 snapshots. You start from the fall of the Berlin Wall, from 1989 to September 11th, just to pick a point. Okay, so the Berlin Wall falls, there's one power, it's the United States. There's a lot of people at the time, and I've written about this, who believe, international lawyers and human rights activists, etc., who believe, well, the Cold War is over. Now we can develop a world order based on law, human rights, etc. Okay? And that's the period in which you have the ICTY, the ICTR are created, the International Criminal Court is created, right? So there are important moves to structure a world based on law and democratic principles. Okay? In the Americas, you have a resolution about democracy. And I can go on, right? You have the strengthening of the African Union, the creation of the change from the OAU. Okay, and then 9/11 happens. And what happens after 9/11 is the new narrative coming from the United States is the alignment is not everyone together on team democracy. It's democracies in opposition to terrorists and radical Islamic states. And okay, now this is the part that's important. And who's on team US? Well, all of Western Europe, any state that is potentially subject to terrorist attacks, even if they don't like the United States techniques and tactics and find them outrageous, they see, let's see, are we a fundamentally Islamic state or are we Western Christian Europeans? Okay, so they're on. And the United States has on Team USA a lot of states in the global south who want the United States support to fight the groups that are dangerous to those states. CEG, and I did a lot of work on this, Pakistan, where Pakistanis, ordinary Pakistanis, not that crazy about folks in the US. When I was in Pakistan I was documenting drone strikes and abuses by US forces in Pakistan. I was not a human rights guy. But when I was there, I didn't look like this. I grew a beard and I had a shalwar kameez and I went under the radar screen because that's the way you could go to a place like Peshawar and talk to people without, potentially risking being kidnapped. Okay, what's my point? The United States, there's a point. The United States created a system where it's the United States, Western European states, Australia, New Zealand, right, standard allies, some states in the Americas, and then states that quite transactionally wanted U.S. support, military bases, to fight Boko Haram. Okay, so that the constellation that the U.S. managed to patch together after 9/11 is fairly broad. Not quite as broad as during the Cold War, and certainly not as broad as during the interregnum from 1989 to September 11, 2001, but significant. What you're seeing now is a shift. And the shift now is it's the United States, Israel, and the Western European states and Australia that support the United States blindly in its support of Israel against everyone else. So not just the Maghreb states, not just the Islamic states, but states in the global south. And the leader here, and I pay a lot of attention to this because, as I said, I lived it for years, I would say is Brazil. And Brazil was tried really hard and watered down the first resolution, the first ceasefire resolution, to get the United States on board, and then the United States played along as though it was going to ratify so that it would be watered down, and then it didn't vote against it. But Brazil and Lula in particular are seen as important leaders of the global South pushback. In other periods, Bolsonaro would have, the last president of Brazil, would have signed on to whatever the United States was doing in Israel without questioning it, in part because he's a rabid evangelical Christian who's the Jews in Israel need to secure it for the return of Jesus. That's a thing. I mean, when people talk about Zionists, not necessarily talking about Jewish Zionists, they're probably as likely to be talking about Christian Zionists. So just to say, I see a reconfiguration happening in real time. Like we're watching history. I think people will look at October 7th the way they look at November 1989, 35 years ago, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the way they look at the end of the Second World War, right? The way they look at the, October 1929, the crash on Wall Street, sort of moments in history that are transformative. That history pivots on that date. And history's going to pivot on October 7th in a way that makes the United States much less relevant. And where I think the rest of the world, is coming together and trying to form some sort of resistance to the United States and South do whatever TF they want, anywhere, everywhere, because they can. Most other countries don't like that. Right? No, seriously, unless you're right on the side next to the bully who's kicking people in the teeth, you don't like the fact that there's a bully kicking people in the teeth. That's where most countries in the world are. And we're seeing, we're seeing the birthing of something different. I don't know what it is. But I'm hopeful that we'll be better than what we have. I don't know where Taiwan fits in that, because they're tension with China, and it's like, the United States is our big, is our friend in the North China Sea. Imagine trying to set up a military base in the North China Sea. It's so outlandish for China to do.
Yeah, just quickly. I guess I've heard a lot in your presentation and your answers to idea that if we can get, locally people to recognize and support human rights doctrine, I guess, and like human rights agreements within like the international world, and if we can get, human rights in some ways to be transformed by, maybe the Western states being like having less power as like we currently do in the UN, that will like be useful in fighting like all these bad things that are going on. And I don't know, I found that really interesting because I think in Professor Miller's class we've spent a lot of time like sort of pulling apart and critiquing human rights law as an entity and humanitarian law and international criminal law, and I don't know, I mean, not like, I guess like analyzing like the good and bad, the useful and not useful parts of it, but like a lot of what I think our conversations have centered on is the idea that like the UN, all these other courts, the European Court of Human Rights, all these things have like really in a lot of ways like legitimated the like Western world order that we see, like deified capitalism, like done all these things and used like the discourse of human rights to justify like imperialist interests in, military invasions into a lot of the Middle East in order to like protect women's rights there and things like that.
You've been a very good student, Professor Miller.
He taught me before I taught you.
Give the student an A. Straight off the bat.
I'm just curious about how
to respond to that.
Well, how to like square like all of these things where it's like, is this like a triage situation where it's like, maybe this person should think about quitting smoking, but not before they have this like bullet removed from them, like what's...
There's some of that, but it's 2:10, so the easy response is, I'm sorry, it's 2:10, we'll leave that. But I won't do that. And I'll steal a few minutes of your time. So here's first what I would say, and I think Professor Miller agrees, but maybe she doesn't. First of all, we have to think of human rights as, I think of it, conceptualize it as a field of struggle. It's not a given. The State Department has a Department of Human Rights. Do I agree with what they say? They have human rights in their title. There are a lot of different flavors of human rights. Many, many different flavors of human rights, okay? I'm not on board with the neoliberal, thin version of human rights. I'm on board with a version of human rights that's transformative and that takes seriously, if you just take seriously the idea that a poor child in pick some part of the world, could be, in the poorest neighborhood in the greater Boston area, or it could be in Haiti, or it could be in Indonesia. I don't care. That child's rights are as valuable, and they have to be ensured the same way that Elon Musk's rights have to be respected. Okay? Now, if you actually look, oh no, what does that mean? It's going to mean a lot of stuff, friends. Okay? That's not the theory that most people operate on. So the short answer is, all of the critiques, all of them, I sign on to all those critiques. I teach Wesleyan Human Rights Advocacy, where we have students who are young and they want to do human rights advocacy work, and they eventually get to do that. But we start by like shredding, tearing down human rights, tearing down this idea that of white saviorism, of Western saviorism, because that's what we have to do. We have to problematize all of it. And then I would say, as bad as human rights is, and there are many legitimate critiques, it's the least bad, relevant, global discourse for reducing the tremendous injustice that we face on a daily basis on the planet, right? But I think we have to get into the trenches and fight those battles. Well, what do we mean by human rights? And not throw in the towel and go, well, human rights, well, I just work for human rights well. They generally get things right, but some things they don't get right, okay? Even as we speak, you know Mershaker? He's the Human Rights Watch, he's the Human Rights Watch guy for Israel and Palestine. He was my student at Stanford. He was in the clinic at Stanford. Omar. Yeah. But I have serious differences with and I'll tell them, but I think that's what we need to do. It's a space that we have to fight for our understanding of what it means, and then try and implement our understanding of what it means. But yeah.
Perfect ending. Good question. Great answer. Love it. Okay. Thank you, James, so much.